This video commentary will be predominantly audio only, so please treat it in the same manner as you would a radio broadcast or podcast, and feel free to listen to it in the background, if you so wish. Should there be a necessity to show particular footage during a section of the video, then I will give warning before that footage is shown. I don't know about you, but I found myself increasingly disappointed and bored with the experience games have been offering for many years now. Initially, I thought this to be a simple case of burnout from having interacted with the medium for most of my life, beginning as early as age 3. But while that no doubt may have clearly been a contributing factor to these feelings, as it often can be for practically anything one does too much, after much thought, reflection, and continual playing of games during this time, I came to the conclusion that burnout was not the primary factor for me. In fact, I dare say it may not be a factor at all. But for the sake of being balanced in one's analysis, then I will submit to the possibility that it is, of course, always a very minor influence at the very least. I originally came to this realization after playing VR for the first time. Oh, and I was utterly enthralled. Not by the games themselves, they were all quite standard affairs, but with the myriad of possibilities that opened up in regards to how I could interact with those worlds. A whole dimension of play and thinking was immediately opened up and apparent to me, and I was drunk with excitement as I tested the various ways I could utilize my body and mind to engage with the extra mechanics that were on offer. All of these brand new possibilities brought with them lots of interesting challenges and interactions, and upon reflection of this time, I was reminded of similar feelings I had growing up playing computer games. Experiencing not only different genres, but also completely new takes on existing genres, often coming with new layers of mechanics and systems made specifically for that game, and add to the world in a way that made sense. I'm drawn more towards examples of gaming in the late 90s and early 2000s, where it seemed the rapid progression in technology, and thus the processing power, provided enormous leaps and allowed fresh reimaginings of game interaction and mechanics, followed by further refinement to later iterations that would see the developer's vision be more completely realized. For myself, looking back from today, it really was a golden era of creativity for gaming. An era where developers were not afraid to get experimental and push new boundaries with their visions. But let's not forget some important considerations that need to be highlighted and separated from my admittedly nostalgia-ridden prose. There's no doubt that being younger and more impressionable alongside the general experience of the gaming medium, being in a still fresh and creative state at the time, and finally mixing these factors together through the perspective of gaining significantly more life experience through to the present day, as I write and read this script, will certainly have added to my reverence of that time, in quite possibly a biased, rose-tinted glasses kind of way. It seemed, or it seems perhaps, I was just getting older and looking back with more longing, as one is inclined to do when life and the passage of time grants ever more means of comparison. If someone were to highlight and name a particular part of my personality, then they may say that I'm somewhat of a skeptic. And I'm especially skeptical of my own thoughts and impulses. It's very tiring, I know. So I believed my prior mentioned concern to likely be the case, and I dismissed any thought to the contrary, reminding myself not to fall into the same nostalgic reverence of the past trap that I note so many others around me seem to do. So I continued on with life, living as one does and playing games on a semi-regular basis when energy and time permitted, I was still generally bored and unimpressed with the offerings of modern games, and I was always reminding myself that this was caused by my getting older and perhaps just outgrowing the medium, especially as adult life and responsibilities demanded ever more of my spirit and soul's undivided attention. So then, why did I still keep myself immersed within the culture whenever I could? Why did I continue researching and seeking new games to try on a regular basis when I had the time, or returning to old favorites or unfinished titles on my to-do list? Why did I still care about the condition and climate of the industry and culture as a whole? I would definitely say my life outside of gaming has been more than fulfilled since becoming an adult. I've experienced many things in my short life, and there are, as is true for all of us, an endless amount still left to be experienced. But safe to say, I have already had my fill to the point that should I suddenly discover my life will come to an end tomorrow, then I believe I will not be resentful or regretful at the hours, days, or months and years which will no longer come to pass for me. In fact, I believe I would quite welcome the rest. I play games, you see, because I truly adore the medium. I consider gaming far superior to any other entertainment medium currently in existence, due to the enormous depth that it is capable of on so many levels, if the makers are able to realize this, of course. So I continued playing and thinking, reflecting. I also double-checked that I wasn't continuing to play games just out of sheer habit or addiction, or to satisfy a part of me that is left wanting. This didn't seem to be the case. I could stop playing for prolonged periods without any apparent withdrawal symptoms anyway. It was only after the announcement of the Final Fantasy VII remake some time ago, a game which is very close to my heart, but one which I personally bemoaned and disagreed with strongly at the idea of being remade, followed by many observations on various forums of people expressing their desire or longing to have all kinds of games they played in the past be remade for the modern era, of which their intentions puzzled me. Why would they want that? I mused to myself. Surely they know they can't reclaim the old experience and all that came with it, and they can only be met with disappointment that the alterations to their beloved experience will ultimately have, as has been such an obvious fact of those who revere the past and try to emulate it. Our history has taught us this countless times, again and again. They are fools, I thought, blind and deaf to the shared wisdom passed on by our ancestors of an aging human's natural inclination to linger and dwell within the past, and the dangerous trappings and inevitable disappointments that follow this desire. Surely wisdom's function, and our recording of it, is so that we can stop repeating the same mistakes, existing in constant loops, getting nowhere, and instead use this wisdom to progress, advance, develop, and be a better, smarter, stronger person than our ancestors before us. This is what they would have wanted after all, I think anyway. They prepare the metaphorical soil in the best conditions they can at the time so that we, their future, grow healthier and better than themselves. I think that is a wonderful, wonderful gesture and gift for them to leave to us. Anyway, I digress. Back on to the topic at hand. So, I downloaded many remastered games over the years, each remastered in varying degrees, games that were and are wonderful experiences, and some of which remain fondly in heart and memory. I thought to myself it would be nice to revisit them as an adult, perhaps, and maybe I'll have a new perspective on things, much as many others have done as well, I'm sure. But after an hour or two of playing them, though, I really didn't care to play them anymore. What's the point? I thought to myself once again. I've already had the core experience, I've mastered the mechanics and systems, I've overcome the challenges faced, and completed the narrative journey with all of the characters. I helped navigate them through their world, I experienced the ups and downs of their story, and finally saw it to conclusion. Why do I need to experience all this again? The experience never left me to begin with. The first moment in time of this occasion, of course, has long since gone, but it's all still very much there within memory. And it has become a part of my life, and a part of my skill set with games as a result. I learned all kinds of new skills from the conquered challenges and experienced new or different perspectives and characters from the story, which I could take forward with me into new territory. I don't need to return. There's nothing else for me to gain or learn. My thoughts concluded. And that's when it dawned on me why I've been so bored with modern gaming for a long while now. It's because I've been playing the same bloody handful of games over and over again for God knows how many years now. Allow me to explain myself. What I mean by this is that developers have been, in my opinion, re-releasing the exact same experiences again and again, just with a new coat of paint. I'm not only speaking of the scourge of endless copy-and-paste sequels, although that is certainly a part of it, and a point I'll get to in a moment. I'm speaking of the distinct lack of new or even significantly changed mechanics and systems for us as players to learn, understand, and manipulate within the game, so we may build upon and enhance a skill set that we have already acquired from previous titles. No, not at all. Instead, we get what is coined as an evolution of already existing, long-standing mechanics and concepts. And in the case of the modern games industry, this evolution they mention, most of the time, it's just a synonym for simplification, but not in a good way. One might describe good simplification as making an element easier to utilize and understand, while still retaining and expanding upon the depth that the element provided by taking advantage of that very same simplification, which then possibly leads to the birth of more interesting mechanics to play with on top of what already existed. But no, that's not what appears to be happening. Instead, what appears to be happening is naught but subtraction. And so we have new games produced that increasingly require less thought and have more automation and hand-holding to near insulting degrees. This is especially true of the prior-mentioned parade of endless yearly sequels and remakes of classic games. Games whose once celebrated and revered gameplay mechanics and world design, which were often celebrated because of how they were intricate, complex, interesting, but yet elegant and cohesive in how well they were all thought out and it was all tied together for the player to explore, discover, and learn of their own agency. But now, their modern counterparts are inundated with objective markers, in-game wall hacks, auto-guiding breadcrumb trails that lead you directly to your next objective. The AI seems to be getting progressively stupider or simpler. Core mechanics significantly dumbed down with each new iteration. We also have objects of interest highlighting as God forbid you actually have to pay attention to the environment around you using your own eyes and senses and brain. There is the single corridor map design which plagued games in the early 2000s, although that has gotten slightly better of late. But then there are battle systems which can automate everything with a single button press. And then we also have the team games, which used to be reasonably complex and have expectations of the players to work together, but now they are diluted or they have outright removed the team play features in favor of instant automation replacements to do it for them, and so on, which consequently removes the feeling of actually working together with another human being because you're not making the effort to engage in those team play actions. Mainstream games now especially are just always telling you exactly where to go and what to do every step of the way, having absolutely no trust and faith in the player's own intelligence and wits to see them through. And whilst they're holding your hand, they're dishing out rewards and medals and achievements, frequently showering you with praise for the most simple and mundane of completed actions. There are many other examples of this dumbing down and automation that I've missed and haven't mentioned, but it's clear when you list even a few of these evolutions together what it results in for the player in the end. Much less thinking and thought. Of course, I would be remiss to not mention that there is an outlier or two of these sequels or reimaginings who at the very least retain the elements that made them interesting, and/or they offer more polished, uncompromised versions of what made them well received originally. But they're becoming fewer and far between, and ever rarer. So this is why I'm bored. Not only are game developers releasing the exact same experiences over and over again, but they're simultaneously dumbing it down with each new iteration. What's going on here? What's driving this behavior? Are we, the general populace, the normal people, the average player, are we getting stupider as time goes on? Is it becoming apparent that our brains are devolving all of a sudden, which has spurred such action from the developers and people who make our games? I think history and the evolution of our species tells us otherwise. After all, we became the strongest, most successful species on this planet because of our capacity to adapt to and conquer the endless challenges that life placed before us. But we didn't do this primarily with our bodies and physicality, which are comparatively weak and frail when measured with nature as a whole. We, of course, mostly used our minds to achieve. Through wisdom and experience passed on by generation to generation, our baseline standard of ability and intelligence continued to increase. What gravely challenged the humans of today became but a minor inconvenience, or nothing at all, for the youths of tomorrow. Youths who were armed with the knowledge of their forefathers and a natural, adaptive conditioning through constant exposure to hardship and challenge. Because of this, they got better and better. And that is what we do as humans. That is why we stand out. Through the capabilities of our biology, we think complexly and work together to adapt and overcome, continuing to improve and get better and better. So I hope by now you can see why this is a very relevant point to make for the topic at hand. Going back to gaming now, modern games appear to be devolving in terms of mechanical and narrative complexity, with the only true evolution being the most shallow and insignificant element, the graphics. Sure, visual fidelity can help to prop up the other, more vital elements, but I believe we have long since passed the threshold where graphics and special effects are a significant boon to the experience. We're saturated with overdone, shiny, flashy effects in all of our visual mediums in today's era. Even walking down any modern street is usually a constant assault on our visual senses as glittering signs and displays all desperately vie for our attention. I'd say we're now fairly immune and indifferent to the splendor that these shiny things offer at this stage. Throwing more polygons and particle effects at us can only see heavy diminishing returns by now, and at worst begin to compromise the other elements due to the time and effort diverted away from much more meaningful aspects of a game. Our brains have always had the wonderful capacity to fill in the blanks and shortcomings of a medium anyway. That itself, if used right, can be a great enhancement to the experience. How many of you can remember scenes of dearly beloved games in such rich and complex detail, far beyond the actual detail that was offered at the time? Many of you, I'm sure. Our brains were able to fill in this detail that was absent to us because the other elements of the game were often developed and engaging enough for us to be able to naturally and happily compensate for what was missing. This resulted in a far deeper, more personal, and thus ultimately more meaningful experience. Why are we forsaking this process now? Why do developers seem to be focusing most of their time and energy on the most vacuous, unimpactful aspect of their work? Why are the wonderful visuals we are presently capable of creating now being used as the main defining point of an experience, rather than just the complementary aspect it should always be. Perhaps those questions can be addressed in another video, but for now, the point I'm making should be very clear, I hope. The result of everything that I have said, and the point I'm ultimately trying to get to, is that I think, as time goes on, games are asking less and less of their players' ability, and they're merely only trying to hold our attention through cheap psychological tricks and manipulation, which is made worse tenfold by the grim fact that this attention is being actively monetized by insatiably greedy minds. If we think ahead here for a moment, for those who grew up with gaming being a large part of their lives from childhood all the way through to adulthood, these are adults who now maybe have children of their own, and perhaps wish to share with their children the many experiences of a medium that once offered so much varied enrichment to them. Now, speaking to those people specifically whom have children, do you really want them growing up, learning and experiencing the games of today in their current state? When comparing the medium to when it was in a much more pure state, when games were made just for the joy of having them be made and wishing to share that experience, when we think of games now, I can only think of the ever-decreasing lack of meaningful challenge and complexity, the incomplete and shallow narratives that serve only as a bedrock for many a modern game's true intention, which is psychological manipulation towards spending more money and deliberately leading players on with games designed to promote a sense of constant fear and anxiety, of never ever having enough within the game to be able to feel a sense of completion and closure from the experience which we all used to get on a regular basis. Games that never want the player to move on, holding on to them tightly, having them always being lusting and greedy for the next in-game vanity item. Items which are deliberately forever obscure and very difficult or never certain to ever be obtained. You and I know very well how games can be powerful with the messages and impressions they pass on to us, young and old people alike, just as books and television can also do. And for those who will grow up spending a significant portion of their time within the gaming medium, which is an ever-increasing amount of us, think of how that can very well affect them and their means of dealing with the struggles of life that will come to them later, as it does for all of us, unless we lead a very insulated life. We can learn and develop countless cerebral and some physical, very important and beneficial skills through gaming that we can take into society and everyday life. Problem-solving skills in a huge variety of ways, a sense of fairness, improved reflexes, hand-to-eye coordination, competitiveness and competition, teamwork and leadership skills, stress management, communication and social skills and general etiquette, prioritizing and learning more patience and discipline, organizational skills, life lessons and concepts told through some of the great stories and experienced even more personally through actually engaging with it through gameplay. The list goes on and on and on. But as we simplify these processes without retaining any of the depth and the skill requirement, so too do we simplify our latent potential and our future creativity, I think. If we should be considered successful parents, or even successful ancestors for our future generations, then beyond raising a healthy child and also continuing to grow and develop ourselves as best we can in our short lifetimes, we also surely need to do our best to ensure future generations can surpass our own personal limits in as many ways possible. We should ourselves always be striving to be better, and future generations should, ideally, be better than us. I'm not talking about it in ways where you have those parents who use their children to fulfill their own personal lost dreams and ambitions, as so many awful parents tend towards. But I mean just to make sure that we raise our future generations, that they are as physically and mentally able, healthy, and developed as possible to take on the endless struggle of life as an adult, in a manner which befits them best as they forge their own path. As games continue to grow in popularity, relevance, and influence in our culture, having now highlighted the enormous positive potential they have for us as humans, I think their devolution is both a failure to us now and for future generations. As we spend more and more time interacting with these mediums, we need to maximize the potential we get from them. This is my argument for why games should demand more from their audience. In an age where technology and digital worlds are becoming our primary means of interaction and development, why not take better advantage of the potential of this medium? Don't be afraid to challenge us, and also as a player and user, don't be afraid to be challenged. You'll become better for it, and you'll appreciate it later, I promise you. So for the betterment of the medium's development and creativity, and for the betterment of ourselves as players and thinking humans, games should absolutely be asking more of their players, mainstream games especially, and the standard of skill and thinking required to get through these experiences should constantly but gradually be set higher and higher with care. So then we can all get better and better, and advance ourselves forward, the medium forward, so that we do not remain in stagnation and degradation.